Are we witnessing the beauty community, specifically the makeup community, fight back against consumerism and capitalism? Let's talk about it.
It's not funny.
I'd like to talk about something that happened in the beauty community earlier this summer. Not about the controversy itself, but what it actually taught us about artistry and education. Because I think the conversation got reduced to who invented transition blush, and I honestly don't think that's the right question. Painted by Esther has openly credited the artists and traditions that influenced her, rather than claiming she invented the concept herself. The technique itself has roots in earlier makeup artistry, including Asian beauty traditions, and has been associated with artists like the late great Kevin Aquan. Her significance is that she refined, demonstrated, and popularized a particular execution of the technique, especially on deeper skin tones and Black women. Then Patrick Ta launched a product line called Transition Blush. And this is where the conversation became complicated. That concern wasn't simply that Patrick Ta was using the technique. No one owns the act of putting blush between the under eye and the cheek. The concern was that the technique had become strongly associated with Painted by Esther's artistry, and particularly with how she demonstrated it on deeper complexions, while Patrick Ta's launch positioned Transition Blush as a branded product concept. Which brings us to a key distinction: invention versus popularization. Let's talk about it. And I want to be very clear. This isn't about saying that Painted by Esther invented blush placement. It's about understanding that there is a difference between inventing a technique and being the person who popularized, refined, and brought a particular execution of that technique, especially when the execution becomes influential in how people approach makeup on deeper skin tones. You can acknowledge the history of a technique while still giving credit to the person who helped bring it into a new cultural moment. For me, this is where credit becomes important. When you're inspired by someone, you don't have to say they invented the entire concept, but you can say, this artist's work influenced the way I approach this. You can acknowledge the lineage. You can tell people where the inspiration came from, because when you don't, the audience may assume the person with the biggest platform originated something that was already being developed and demonstrated by someone else. Another part of the conversation was representation. The technique became particularly recognizable because of the way Painted by Esther used it to create dimension and seamless transition on deeper complexions. So naturally, people question what it means when a technique becomes commercially packaged by a major beauty brand, but the person who helped popularize that execution isn't centered in the conversation. Representation isn't just about putting deeper shades in a product line. It's also about recognizing the artists who have developed techniques that allow those products to be used beautifully on those complexions. There was also criticism about whether the shade range and pigment story actually reflected the deeper skin tones that had become central to the technique's popularity. And this is where I think the beauty industry needs to have a bigger conversation, because the situation made me think about how much we have shifted from teaching artistry to selling products. And here's the real point of this argument. You don't necessarily need another blush. You might need to understand color theory. You might need to understand undertones. You might need to understand placement. You might need to know how to layer cream, liquid, and powder products. You might need to understand how to create a transition between two colors. And those are skills you can carry with you long after a product is discontinued. There are techniques that makeup artists have been doing for years with products that are already in our kits. But instead of teaching people how to manipulate what they already own, we're constantly being introduced to a new product that supposedly solves the problem. And sometimes the innovation is real, but sometimes the education is what's missing. The lesson from the transition blush conversation isn't simply about who invented a technique. It's about crediting the artists who influence us, understanding the history behind the techniques. Because when we educate instead of just sell, we don't create consumers who constantly need the next products. We create artists, creators, and beauty lovers who understand what they're doing. And that's where the real power lies.